Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the Smart Cities podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things smart cities. The podcast is the creation of ARC Advisory Group's Smart City practice. ARC advises leading companies, municipalities, and governments on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business and quality of life in their cities. To engage further, please like and share our podcast or reach out directly on Twitter at Smart City Viewpoints or on our website at www.arcweb.com/industries/smart-cities.
Welcome to the Smart City Podcast. I'm Jim Frazier, and we are here live at the ARC Forum in Orlando, Florida. I'm pleased to be joined today with ARC Advisory Group's Senior Analyst, Peter Manos. Peter, welcome today.
Pleasure to be here.
Hey, this is a recap of the ARC Forum as it's winding up today. Peter, this is your first ARC Forum. Can you give us some of your perspectives of our event this week?
Just the high power know-how of both our analysts and the great solution providers and software vendors that are here and the user community. When I come at this as a utility industry and smart grid expert, and yet even with great conversations with utility people who are here, it's also been great to have all these exchanges with people in other industries. And we're all concerned about a lot of the same things. And the value that's being driven by digital transformation is really amazing. And the explosion of data, in all industries. In my industry, it's a history of having originally had, 1 meter reading per month, right? To now having meter readings at 15-minute intervals or more frequently. So that is an enormous increase, right? 1 a month versus 96 per day, right? And when you add in electric vehicles and a lot of other real-time transactions that are happening on the electric grid, that explosion of data and how to leverage it is just driving amazing change. So we see that in all the other industries involved in industrial automation, the data from sensors. It's all not tenfold increase, not 100. It's 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold increases. And the solution providers are just doing amazing things. And the cultural shifts in good ways that are occurring in the user communities, everyone's learning from everyone regardless of industry. And Jim, another thing I would say is when you look at COP26 in Glasgow, this was the first of the 26 annual international efforts where industry-specific detailed planning was beginning. And that also includes cross-industry things that have to be done in the energy transition. You're going to have, waste materials from the pulp and paper industry becoming feedstock for creating sustainable aviation fuel, or in an agribusiness or aquaculture or land farm business, taking its biological waste materials and having that be feedstock for a facility that generates electricity and does carbon capture for a net zero or even a negative carbon footprint. How do these things scale? How will they scale? That's the big thing, because some of them it's going to take new solutions and new improvements on existing ideas to get these things to scale. And that dovetails with the last thing I'll say real quick, which is I have had a vision, and many people have, for many decades about what asset owner-operators could be doing in the future. And it was a vision driven for me by experience with IBM. I mean, this goes back to the 1970s. IBM, when they were building their IBM 360 mainframe and all these other boxes that they would sell, they developed a discipline called component failure impact analysis. And the luxury that industry has with chips is you can put all the components that you're going to be working with when you're building a complex system. You can put each of them in an oven, heat it up, test it, and accelerate the failures so that in a week you could get the equivalent of years of operation. And you intentionally, with these test chips, for every component, burn them in and determine the exact full bathtub curve, the full life cycle performance and when it's going to fail. And component failure impact analysis, as I said, 50-year history with that. They were able to actually allocate accurately the service personnel when the final devices were built with these complex assemblies, because they could mathematically compute the reliability based on the components' reliability and the build-out and design. And the vision I've always had for decades has been, how can we do that with a fleet of electric, asset infrastructure, right? Transmission, distribution, power plants, and other industries have their fleets of assets. Well, those devices, electromechanical devices, they don't behave physics-wise the way chips do. You don't have the luxury of accelerating failures and having that exact, really accurate prediction. But with the data we're building up with these amazing capabilities now in terms of industrial automation, we're going to have, and the simulation capabilities, not just machine learning, but cognitive AI, right? We're going to be able to do component failure impact analysis on everything in the future. I know it's pie in the sky. It's a green pie in the sky, right? How do you do sustainability economically? Well, you need to be able to model things both from a design digital twin and an operational digital twin in ways where you're building these incredibly revealing models that give you insights on how to do things in new and better ways. So again, I believe in engineering economics, full life cycle costing. What's an externality now might not be an externality in 5 or 10 years, right? You might have to include things in your calculations on impacts in greater ways and get industries to do things in their supply chains for their customers and from their suppliers in the amount of creativity we're going to be able to unleash, and which is being unleashed in this conference, is just very inspiring to me.
And that is a summary of the detailed, substantial information that you get by coming to the ARC Forum. As for me, I see here a combination of a very valuable education process, technology and business process, education process, number one. Number two, I see the invaluable networking of meeting senior leaders across your suppliers, or alternately your customer end user community, as well as the third-party grouping of facilitators, whether it be integrators, consulting engineering firms, or others that work in the domain. But perhaps the most important piece, and I'll call this number three, is that senior leaders are here of both of those organizations. So you can come face to face to people that write the RFPs and have the budgetary authority to make purchases happen. Similarly, if you are a end user that is considering deploying a substantial technology upgrade, you can actually talk face to face with very senior leaders to go out and find out the answers to your most critical questions. So that in a nutshell, I think, is the value of our ARC forum. But let me turn it back to Peter. What are some of your particular focus takeaways from your first week here at the ARC forum?
Well, thanks for that question, Jim. I would say when I look at the energy transition and business value being driven in ways that technology helps to get implemented, it's just very exciting. And some of the specific ones were talking with people in other industries and realizing how much benefit there is, not just in terms of best practices, which is huge for driving business value, but also in terms of a more holistic view. So we can look at each industry in its silo: pulp and paper, agribusiness, utilities, oil and gas, CPG, and other manufacturing. And we know, like, in some ways, what the solutions are going to be to help achieve greater economic value and sustainability. But when you look at it from a cross-industry point of view and from a circular economy and supply chain point of view, it gets even more interesting. It helps to validate ideas and maybe improve on them. So, for example, I met with people in different chemical and engineering expertise areas. And I was able to say, hey, okay, my understanding is, let's say, for example, take ammonia. 3% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions are associated with production of ammonia. It's across a whole bunch of different industries. What are you in your industry looking to do to achieve your sustainability goals and emission reduction goals around ammonia? And do that with hydrogen. How do you make green hydrogen? How can it really scale up? And the same with natural gas and biofuels. So the way that those, if you look at the materials in the supply chain cross industry and start trying to model from a big holistic approach again, right? No externalities, and it's almost the way think about total quality management in the 80s. That was developed, as everyone knows, because Japan being an island, real estate was very restricted. You had to really have minimal inventory and have really efficient, supply chain tracking and processes, right? Well, the world is an island in this bigger sense that we're now struggling with in terms of the climate crisis. And fundamentally, economic growth should be part of that. If you take developing countries and enable people to go from a rural existence to a more urban existence, that actually lowers the carbon footprint. We tend to think of urbanization as a polluting thing, and that sometimes in the developed world, when you have more urbanization, if you don't do it in a well-planned way, it can lead to more emissions per capita. But really, when you look at the developing world, big economies like rural China, rural India, there's a tremendous benefit and reduction in greenhouse gas emissions when you go from an agrarian lifestyle to what we would consider a middle class and above lifestyle. And people get too focused on population growth. Sure, there are impacts in terms of resources with population growth, but between now and 2050, there's 3 to 4 times bigger impact, roughly, with the people who are alive today whose standard of living and level of consumption per capita is going to go up. So that's 3 to 4 times more than population growth, because they're here now, right? So the value to enabling a good energy transition with economic justice across all these segments of the human community, that's not just mom and apple pie. It's easy to naively think, and write it off and say, business comes from. No, if you want to have a sustainable first world economy, you need to bring up the level of living of the developing world, and you can see that in how India in past decades has gone from a predominantly maybe it was like a 20% service economy to now like 50% service economy. There are economic benefits to us in America and Europe based on that fact. All the support and technologies and services that come from that service sector in an economy like India, that benefits us, our bottom line, and theirs, right? So the rising tide can float all boats, I would say.
I'll jump in there. We had a great session this week, and I'll focus on that about sustainability and ESG, in particular economic opportunities for suppliers. And it was a very fascinating takeaway that was unexpected to me. And when probably the major thing I learned this week was in our panel, we, of course, talked about digital transformation and its relation to sustainability and ESG rating systems. And while ARC has talked and has been a leader in digital transformation with our digital transformation and user council and a variety of other activities, in our panel discussion, we drilled down to a very granular level where we got to the point where we discussed measuring things. Not in relation to the 14 or 15 or 16 ESG hierarchies and ratings that are out there, but more in a philosophical sense of systems engineering. And in particular, Jeff Kent from Procter & Gamble talked about their systems engineering process. So did, on the other end of the continuum, Jeff Benavides, the sustainability manager of Orange County, Florida, with 8,000 employees and 1.5 million customers that reside in the area. That's something new to us, and it's something that enlightened me. The fact that from a consumer products manufacturer like Procter & Gamble to Orange County, they're all taking a very structured approach to digital transformation as they try to address the sustainability and ESG issues.
And it was unprompted. They raised system engineering. I know it's one of your favorite topics, but they raised it. You had nothing to. Yeah, it was.
I had nothing to do with that at that point.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating that they walked through that step-by-step cookbook process of define your stakeholder communities, extract narrative user needs out of them, see which ones have consensus, take those consensus-based needs, turn them into measurable functional requirements for a project spec or an RFP or a scoping document. And oh, by the way, create test plans or a roadmap so that you do in fact satisfy those needs and no other requirements creep into your project. That was enlightening to me. I've lived that for a long time, but to hear it unprompted from one end of the spectrum, Procter & Gamble, and the other, Orange County, as well as some of the other folks on the panel, was really enlightening. And it shows that for us to do sustainability and ESG, ARC is a place where we can facilitate getting down to that level where you can actually make a roadmap to get to where you want to be. It was interesting because I led off that session with a comment that in my first day of engineering school a long time ago, the professor stood up and said, if you don't this is engineering school. If you don't measure it, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And later on that same day, we talked about being on the sustainability roadmap, and systems engineering starts with measuring it. Yep. So that's my takeaway. ARC has done some other innovative, interesting things. With the great resignation that we know is happening out there in the world, and the challenge of STEM graduates for jobs, we are at this ARC forum. We did begin a diversity and inclusion effort, including a program specifically focusing on emerging professionals in the domain. And I urge everybody to come to arcweb.com to see the developments about that as we move forward in the future. There is a dedicated podcast about that. There's very likely going to be a mentoring program that we see a little bit later this year or early next year. And I would just urge everyone to consider coming to our next ARC Americas Forum back here in Orlando, Florida at the Renaissance at SeaWorld. In February 2023. Peter, do you have any other comments?
I think you captured it beautifully, Jim, and I thought it was interesting that during one of the big sessions where everyone was in the auditorium together, one of the presenters who's been here for many sessions remarked on how the audience was distinctly younger, that there were still a portion of folks with white hair, but that it was getting younger. And I think the wisdom that we're exchanging here comes from old generations in the workforce. And I learned from everybody, and I think if you look at participating with us in the future, you will too.
Well, thank you very much to our audience, and we hope to see you again on a future edition of the Smart City Podcast.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the Smart Cities Podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things smart cities. The podcast is the creation of ARC Advisory Group's Smart City practice. ARC advises leading companies, municipalities, and governments on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business and quality of life in their cities. To engage further, please like and share our podcast or reach out directly on Twitter at Smart City Viewpoints or on our website at www.arcweb.com/industries/smart-cities.